Two friends, a quiet night, and a decision that spiraled into a nightmare no one saw coming. What really happened during the Ricardo and Denizio incident? A story so haunting, it's left more questions than answers. In the summer of 2014, four friends gathered to have an adventure in their lives that would challenge their guts and curiosity. Their destination was the Arrays in the Cove del, a cave with dark appeal in Costa Brava, Spain. Despite the ominous stories associated with the cave, people could not resist the urge to explore the place. They had no idea that this dive would turn into a horror, and one of them would be stuck in a life-or-death situation, struggling against all the odds. Welcome to Scary True. In today's video, we'll be journeying back to the past to reveal the trauma some divers went through at the Cave of Caskets. Cove dels Arrays, or the Cave of Caskets, is not very large for an underwater cave. It measures only 262 feet, or approximately 80 meters, from one end to the other. The entrance is located 23 feet below sea level, and one might not expect that many dangers lurk beneath such shallow water. To marine biologists, underwater photographers, and divers, the cave has several interesting geological formations and a variety of marine life. But for most people, its dark image and experience of fatal crashes deter them from using it. Due to the silt covering the floors, the soft clay walls, and the almost complete absence of light, even experienced divers feel uncomfortable inside. In addition, it has the myth of the second chamber that has never been discovered. Despite the fact that there are maps of the cave, this chamber is still unknown, and there are many secrets here. For adventure enthusiasts, this element of the unknown makes Cove dels Arrays an exciting proposition. On the morning of 19th of July 2014, the day was bright and sunny in Costa Brava, Spain, as four friends, Ricardo, Denizio, and two others whose identity had been withheld, set out for an adventure that had been planned for several months. This was not your average dive. Their target was Cove dels Arrays, also referred to as the Cave of Caskets, a place that is famous for its beauty and the risk that comes with it. The friends had made careful preparations, which included studying the structure of the cave, procuring all the equipment that would be needed, and even strategizing. But none of them had ever performed a dive of this kind before. The group was very enthusiastic as they entered a small boat that was to transport them to the mouth of the cave. It was not just a dive but an opportunity to conquer the world, and that is why it was so important. To Ricardo and Denizio, two pals who have been friends since childhood and who have the same passion for adventure, this trip was particularly significant. What made Cove dels Arrays so appealing was its potential for finding something new. The cave was relatively small by the standards of underwater caves, being only 262 feet, 80 meters, long, but it was a mystery how the second chamber was not yet explored. The friends knew that the scientific community was interested in more information about the geology of the cave and its ecosystem, and they wanted their expedition to help with this. For them, the dive was an opportunity to go as far as one could, both physically and mentally, and to be able to say I did it to few people in the world. Still, the group was fully aware of the risks associated with cave diving and was excited about it. The walls were made of soft clay, and the floors were covered with silt in Cove dels Arrays, so a person could lose sight in a matter of seconds. Also, the cave was not well explored, and the second chamber was not well documented at all. The dangers were apparent, but what enticed the adventure was the ability to face these risks directly. Once the boat arrived at the location of the dive, they started putting on their gear. Ricardo and Denizio, who were the most excited swimmers, took a serious pose before the start of the dive. Their two companions played different roles. One got into the water with the three others, and the fourth was left on the boat to blow a whistle in case of any complications. This was a very sensible precaution which all of them hoped would never be needed. The friends were not only looking for the adrenaline rush but also the goal to achieve once they got to the cave. They thought their dive could help reveal what was buried deep in the cave's bowels. However, they did not consider the fact that none of them had adequate experience to work in such a demanding climate. The lack of a proper role model or guide made them more vulnerable. When the three of them were ready to go down, the light filtering through the Costa Brava's water did not make the feat look as dangerous as it actually was. Little did they realize that this moment of calm was to be followed by a storm of sorts, and the dangers that they had not foreseen would soon become all too real. The dive started without any problems. Ricardo, Denizio, and the third diver went to the nearby cave, which was not very deep and full of marine life. The water of Costa Brava was very still and very clear, and this gave them the impression of the first part of their dive. The feelings of adventure then overcame them as they neared the entrance to the Cove Del's arrays. The entrance was at a depth of 23 feet and was an opening that was hidden and surrounded by soft clay walls and a silt-filled floor. It bore very little information on the risks that were present within the house. Before entering, the group realized they had made a critical oversight. They had forgotten their guide rope. In cave diving, a guide rope is a safety item that can be used in case of divers' orientation loss and low visibility. Without it, even the most experienced divers could easily get lost. The third diver realized the gravity of the situation as soon as he got there. Having done some cave dives before, he learned how fast things can go wrong if you don't have this particular item. He attempted to dissuade Ricardo and Denisio from aborting the dive, appealing to them. But he was ignored, and his warnings were thrown into the bin. Ricardo and Denisio, who felt strong and ready to go further, decided that they could dive without the guide rope. Both had prior experience in caving and thought they could handle the dangers involved adequately. They couldn't entertain the option because it felt like abandoning the dream they had been plotting for months. They nodded at each other and walked into the cave, flashlights illuminating the increasing darkness. At first, the situation looked promising. The first 115 feet of the cave were surprisingly well lit. The clay walls were not eroded, and the silt on the floor was not displaced. They moved along the walls of the cave, using their flashlights, and were amazed at the eerie beauty of the place. The water was calm, and the dim light coming from the entrance behind them made them feel safe. It got even stranger as they went further. The beautiful sunlight that made the dive seem safe was gone, and the divers were left in almost total blackness. After 260 feet, both of them started to feel the pressure of the unknown on them. The cave became narrower, and the darkness of the underwater world made the silence even more oppressive around them. It was then that they realized that they had stretched it far enough. As they reached to turn around, something went wrong. With their fins, they disturbed the silt on the bottom of the cave, and soon, a thick curtain of water and silt was drawn around them. The fine particles floated in the water, and they could no longer see through it. Within the blink of an eye, the previously obvious route towards the surface disappeared. Ricardo and Denisio were overwhelmed. They could not use their flashlights because the muddy water was rising and swirling around them. There was no way of telling which way the exit was without the guide rope or some other means of marking the path. When fears started setting in, Ricardo and Denisio knew the worst was yet to come. They were in an underwater maze with little oxygen left and no idea how to get out. Each step could lead them deeper into the cave and away from the exit they were trying to reach. The very things they used, their fins, had caused their doom, and now they were fighting against time and Cove Del's arrays in the depths of the sea. Swishing their fins on the bottom, they raised a cloud of loose silt, which soon became a solid curtain that closed about them. This silt, which is formed by fine particles that have settled on the bottom over hundreds of years, is a well-documented danger in underwater caves. In a short time, they became invisible to the natural eye. They could not see each other, the flashlights, their hands in front of their face, or anything at all. The large opening of the cavern that once inspired such admiration now was a potential death chamber, and the longer they stayed the closer they were to death. Ricardo and Denisio started getting nervous as they came to understand the severity of the situation. Lacking a guide rope, which is usually used in cave diving to show divers the way out, they had no means of determining which way was the correct one. Their fins, suitable for swimming in the deep sea, only agitated the silt more, worsening the situation for them. Each movement posed the possibility of going further in the cave. This made them farther from safety. Panic rose to desperation and then to fight for their lives as they struggled to remain rational. They realized that waiting for the silt to settle to the bottom of the river was not possible. Silt in underwater caves can stay in suspension for hours and, at times, days, depending on the movement of water. Their air was fast running out, and this was because the tanks they had were small. Every breath took oxygen while giving off carbon dioxide, which only worsened the toxicity of their enclosed space. The two divers tried to swim back to the point they had come from, but as they had no reference points or a string to follow, they were, in effect, lost. Their flashlights were rather strong, but they could not do anything against the silt cloud. They gripped the last bit of hope as they could and tried to remain calm despite the fact that the chances of their survival were slim. Then, as if from the blue, an idea, a glimmer of hope, emerged from the gloom. It was a faint, barely noticeable light that gave the people in the building a mere hope of survival. Denizio noticed it first, swam towards it, and called on Ricardo to join him. The light seemed to come from a small hole in the wall of the cave, big enough only to accommodate their bodies. When they were near the crack, they had to move through it, even though it was very tight. The break, made by natural tectonic movements over thousands of years, bent and became thinner as they moved. They were in so much trouble as they moved around, their dive equipment rubbed against the rock walls. However, Denizio and Ricardo were able to force themselves through the opening. On the other hand, they found an air pocket stuck inside a parallel cavern. This is a rather rare occurrence that happens in some underwater caves where rocks move to form closed chambers. For a while, they were able to take off their regulators and take in the fresh air as they relieved themselves from the ordeal. But that was not the end of it for them. The air in the pocket was limited, and they were gradually using it up. Without a clear path to the surface, Ricardo and Denizio face an agonizing dilemma: remain and choke to death, or go back into the murky waters in search of a savior. The crack widened into a small airspace in another adjacent cavern. This was Ricardo and Denizio's only chance amidst the dangerous depths of Cove Del's arrays. They were exhausted and panting when they took off their gear and breathed in the thin, though scarce, air. For a moment, there was hope they had just barely escaped the immediate threat of asphyxiation. But this was a temporary sanctuary with huge costs associated with it. The air pocket, though was a life-saving measure, was anything but safe. The small space allowed little air circulation. With each breath they exhaled, fresh air was gradually replaced with carbon dioxide. When fresh air did not come into the cavern, carbon dioxide levels started to rise, a condition called hypercapnia. This buildup would slowly accumulate in their systems, and they would become confused, panicked, and possibly pass out if help was not forthcoming. To their horror, the walls of the cavern were smooth and clay-like. There was no place to put a foot or even a hand. Ricardo and Denizio had to swim with their legs and arms busy, moving them in circles, an activity that exhausted them even further. The water was estimated to be about 15 C, 59 F, which made them develop hypothermia, making them weaker and less focused. In such conditions, even the most experienced divers are alive against the clock. Daylight faded, and the emotional and physical stress of the two men was clearly visible. Ricardo, being the weaker of the two, began to be overwhelmed by the water. His breathing became ragged, an indication that his body was starting to tire and that carbon dioxide buildup was becoming a problem. Although Denizio was getting weaker, he tried to use the last energy to drag Ricardo to the surface over and over in an attempt to save his friend. However, the chances were slim. Respiration, the basic, involuntary function that provides existence, was gradually becoming their undoing. The decrease in oxygen concentration in the cavern affected their rationality and decision-making capacity. They got confused, and their actions were slow. The only sound that filled the cavern was their panting, and sometimes a desperate splashing in the water by the captives. In such a situation, the human body is put to its most severe stress as it struggles to survive. Cold water hypothermia is not only life-threatening but also leads to cardiac arrhythmias and muscle failure when exposed to cold water for a long time. Along with the changes in hypercapnia, the situation for Ricardo and Denizio became even more desperate. Finally, Ricardo's strength failed him. For the final time, Denizio could only watch as he sank under the water and did not resurface. All his strength was almost drained, and he was all alone in the stagnant, hot air of the air pocket. There seemed to be no hope, but Denizio continued to live in the middle of overwhelming despair and suffering. Little did he know, rescue divers were already swimming in the dangerous silty water, trying to locate him as soon as possible. On the surface, the fourth friend immediately sounded the alert because he knew what was at stake. At approximately 11:00 am, Spain's civil guard was informed, and they quickly started planning a rescue operation. Corporal Fernando Adri, a professional diver who was well informed about search and rescue operations in water bodies, was in charge of the operation. His team was made up of divers from the Civil Guard's National Diving Squad, which is responsible for conducting rescue operations. Understanding the cave's richness, Adri also involved marine biologists, photographers, and fishermen who knew the area. However, the absence of more specific maps of the cave network posed a major problem. One biologist gave a sketchy description of the first parts. The rest, such as the air chamber where the divers were caught, was beyond human knowledge. The situation inside the cave complicated the rescue mission. The silt cloud raised by Ricardo and Denizio made the environment nearly pitch black, making it almost impossible to see. Even for the professional divers, who are used to low visibility, this was one of the most difficult situations they have met. The threats of the rescue mission were further compounded by the cave's very small passages, unpredictable terrain, and low oxygen levels. It was not an easy task to accomplish, but the team did not relent. Their plan was very well thought out. Before they entered, they attached a guideline outside the cave to guarantee they would be able to get out if the silt affected clarity. It was a measure that, unfortunately, Ricardo and Denizio had never thought about. As the day progressed, the divers swam towards the air pocket through the thick water. With the help of strong torchlights, they were able to find the room where Ricardo and Denizio had sought cover. Their first discovery was rather painful: Ricardo lying dead in his diving gear, still wearing his wetsuit. The actual cause of death was established to be hypercapnia, or carbon dioxide toxicity, compounded by fatigue and the poor quality of the air in the pocket. To their surprise, Denizio was still breathing and struggling to hold onto a piece of rock that was cut off sharply. But he was in bad shape. He was also dehydrated, hypothermic, and had a buildup of carbon dioxide in his blood that made him severely disoriented. Due to this confusion, he was even fighting the rescuers, thinking they were a threat to him. Adri and his team attempted to reason with him, but his state was such that it was hard to understand anything he said. Recognizing that Denizio would not cooperate willingly, the team made a difficult decision: they had to anesthetize him to guarantee his safe removal from the scene. Putting a diver to sleep in such circumstances was a very dangerous thing to do because additional injuries were very likely to occur. Denizio was rescued after being trapped in the cave for about 24 hours. It was a miracle that he survived the attack. EMTs were on standby, and he was given treatment for severe dehydration, hypothermia, and the toxic effects of CO2. He took time to recover, but he did. Eventually, Denizio's life was saved. However, the operations of the rescue team did not end there. Ricardo's family and friends were able to get his body from the cave and bury him properly. This operation was also risky, but due to the efficiency of the team, it was accomplished as planned. It was a sad and timely wake-up call about the dangers of cave diving and the need to undertake thorough preparations before embarking on such dangerous adventures. Corporal Adri also pointed out that the tragedy could have been avoided assuming they used a safety guideline. After the sad event that happened at Cove Del's Arrays, Corporal Fernando Adri investigated to establish the factors that led to the disaster. He found out that this was a series of avoidable errors. Not a single one of the divers had adequate training for cave diving, no certification, nothing. It was a life-changing experience for Denizio. Despite his physical victory over the impossible odds, he became psychologically scarred by Ricardo's death. The mishap was a good lesson on the need to prepare and respect the risks associated with cave diving. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit the like button and make sure to subscribe to the channel for more harrowing tales of courage, survival, and the mysteries that lie just beneath the surface.